At my daughter's wedding, she grabbed the microphone and said, "I've always hated our last name. I'm ashamed to be her daughter. My children will never carry it." Everyone laughed, but she didn't know that name came from millionaires. That same week, I inherited $20 million. I sat frozen at the head table, crystal champagne flute halfway to my lips, as my daughter's words echoed through the ballroom. The 300 guests, mostly Craig's wealthy family and friends, tittered uncomfortably. A few gasped. The rest laughed along as if Beverly had made a charming joke instead of publicly disowning me. "To finally becoming a Hamilton," she continued, her white designer gown glittering under the chandelier light, "and leaving Cooper behind forever." She raised her glass toward her new husband, who wasn't smiling. Craig's face had gone still, his eyes darting between Beverly and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern? Embarrassment? Revelation? I forced my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile and raised my glass mechanically. 36 years of maternal instinct. Protect Beverly, never make a scene, sacrifice everything for her happiness, overrode the searing pain in my chest. The toast continued. The moment passed. The wedding planner signaled for the band to start playing. But the wound remained raw and exposed, like a third-degree burn that hadn't yet begun to hurt because the nerve endings were too damaged to register pain. "Marion," a gentle hand touched my arm. Craig's mother, Elizabeth Hamilton, leaned toward me, her diamond earrings catching the light. "I'm so sorry. That was inappropriate." The kindness in her voice nearly broke my composure. I'd spent months worrying that the Hamiltons, with their hotel fortune and 5 generations of wealth, would look down on me, a single mother who'd worked as an administrative assistant her entire life. Instead, they'd welcomed me warmly, while my own daughter had just denounced me to curry favor with her new social circle. "Beverly's just excited about starting her new life," I said automatically, the same excuses I'd been making since she was a teenager, embarrassed by our modest home and my sensible car. Elizabeth's perfectly lined eyes narrowed slightly. "That's very gracious of you." The reception continued in a blur. I smiled for photographs. I thanked guests for coming. I pretended not to notice the pitying glances or hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Through it all, Beverly floated through the ballroom in her designer gown, never once meeting my eyes. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, alone in my hotel room, that I finally allowed myself to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere beneath even the humiliation. This was grief, I realized. I was mourning the daughter I thought I'd raised, the values I thought I'd instilled, the relationship I thought we had. I'd gotten pregnant with Beverly at 17, terrified, abandoned by her father, but determined to create a good life for my child. My own parents had supported me completely, especially my father. Dad had worked double shifts as a mechanic to help me finish high school while caring for an infant. He'd watched Beverly so I could attend community college at night. He'd fixed my ancient car repeatedly so I could drive to the 2 jobs I worked to afford Beverly's dance lessons, school trips, and eventually college tuition. "Education and hard work," Dad always said. "Those are the only things no one can ever take from you, Marion." He died when Beverly was 12. A quiet, unassuming man who read voraciously despite having left school after 8th grade. Beverly had barely known him, already too preoccupied with trying to befriend the wealthy girls at the private school I'd sacrificed everything to afford for her. The morning after the wedding, I checked out early, avoiding the farewell brunch. I couldn't bear to see Beverly and Craig off on their 3-week Mediterranean honeymoon, not with her words still ringing in my ears. I drove home to my modest 2-bedroom bungalow, the home where I'd raised Beverly alone, working overtime to make the mortgage payments while putting every spare dollar into her education and opportunities. The home she'd been so eager to leave behind. The message light on my answering machine was blinking, probably wedding guests or relatives calling to check on me. I ignored it, too emotionally exhausted to speak to anyone. 3 days passed in a fog. I called in sick to work for the first time in 11 years. I ignored the phone. I moved through my empty house like a ghost, surrounded by photographs of a daughter who was ashamed of me. On the 4th day, the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer, but something, perhaps years of responsible adulthood, pushed me to my feet. Julia Williams stood on my porch, elegant in her tailored suit despite the summer heat, briefcase in hand. We'd been best friends since 3rd grade. She'd held my hand during labor with Beverly, helped me study for night classes, celebrated every small victory of single motherhood with me. Now a successful attorney, she'd attended the wedding, but left early for a work emergency. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, pushing past me into the living room. "Thanks," I replied, closing the door behind her. "If you've come to check on me after Beverly's toast, I'm fine. I haven't been able to reach you for days." Julia set her briefcase on my coffee table. "And while we definitely need to discuss that horrific display of ingratitude from your daughter, that's not why I'm here." Something in her tone made me pause. Julia looked excited? Her eyes had a brightness I hadn't seen since we were teenagers planning our futures. "Marion, I've been trying to tell you something important." She unlatched her briefcase. "You know the investigation my firm has been conducting into unclaimed assets and investments? The one I mentioned last month?" I nodded vaguely, recalling something about her firm's project to locate overlooked investments and return them to rightful owners. "We found something." Julia pulled out a thick folder. "Your father's investments, to be precise." "My father? He was a mechanic. He never had money to invest." Julia smiled, sliding the folder across the table to me. "Apparently, he was also a quiet genius. In 1972, he purchased land on what was then the outskirts of the city, land that now sits directly in the path of the new tech corridor development." My hand trembled as I opened the folder, seeing photocopies of deeds and contracts in my father's neat handwriting. "There's more," Julia continued. "He also bought stock in a tiny startup computer company in 1976, 1,000 shares at $2 each. That company is now Valence Tech." My head snapped up. Even I knew Valence Tech, one of the world's largest technology corporations. "Marion," Julia said quietly, "your father left you just over $20 million. $20 million? The words felt foreign in my mouth, mathematical symbols rather than an actual sum of money that could belong to me. "That's impossible." Julia pulled more documents from her briefcase, bank statements, stock certificates, property assessments, spreading them across my coffee table like playing cards in a high-stakes game. "The land alone is worth $8.3 million with the new development plans," she explained, tapping a color-coded map. "The Valence Tech stock, adjusted for splits and dividends over 45 years, comes to approximately $11.7 million. There are also some smaller investments that total around $800,000. I stared at the papers, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate mistake. My father had fixed cars for a living. We'd lived in a small rental house my entire childhood. Mom had worked as a waitress until her arthritis became too painful. We'd never gone hungry, but luxury had been non-existent. Did my mother know about this? Julia shook her head. Based on the documentation, I don't believe so. Everything was in your father's name only, and he never touched any of it, not even when your mother needed expensive medical care before she passed. My best guess is that he viewed these as extremely long-term investments, possibly meant for future generations. Future generations. The irony hit me like a physical blow. Beverly, who had just publicly renounced her Cooper heritage, was the future generation my father had been thinking of when he invested his modest savings so carefully. Does anyone else know about this? Just my firm's asset research team, and they're bound by confidentiality. As your attorney of record, I was authorized to inform you directly. I rose from the couch, needing to move as thoughts raced through my mind. Through the living room window, I could see Mrs. Abernathy walking her dachshund past my slightly overgrown lawn. The same view I'd had for 26 years, the same ordinary life that Beverly had found so shameful. "The Cooper name she's so desperate to escape," I said quietly, "is worth $20 million. Julia watched me carefully. "What are you thinking, Marion?" What was I thinking? The question unlocked a flood of emotions I couldn't immediately sort through. Shock, vindication, bitterness, and something else. Something that felt dangerously like freedom. "I'm thinking about Barcelona," I said, surprising myself. Julia raised her eyebrows. "Barcelona? Remember in community college, that architecture course I loved? The professor showed slides of Gaudi's buildings, and I promised myself someday I'd see them in person. I remember. You were working double shifts at the hospital then, and Beverly got accepted to that elite summer dance program the same week. The deposit was due immediately." I shrugged. Barcelona got filed away with all my other someday dreams. Dreams I'd packed away, one by one, to create opportunities for Beverly. The architecture degree I'd abandoned for a reliable administrative job with better health insurance. The travel fund that became Beverly's private school tuition. The small pottery studio I'd hoped to open that instead financed Beverly's designer wardrobe when she insisted she was being ostracized for wearing poor people clothes. You could go to Barcelona tomorrow if you wanted, Julia pointed out. You could buy a house there. The possibility hovered in the air between us, almost too enormous to contemplate. Beverly and Craig won't return from their honeymoon for another 2.5 weeks, I said slowly, ideas beginning to crystallize. They're on that Mediterranean cruise his parents gave them. And I need time to think about what this means, what I want to do. I gestured at the documents spread across the table. All these years, I believed I was just a working-class single mom who got lucky with a healthy, smart child. Now I discover I'm a millionaire? You've been a millionaire for years, Julia corrected. You just didn't know it. I picked up a stock certificate with my father's name on it. Thomas James Cooper. A quiet, thoughtful man who read library books by the dozen and taught me to change my own oil. Who told me, when my high school boyfriend abandoned me after learning I was pregnant, that family stands by you when life gets hard? Beverly doesn't know yet, I said, the realization dawning fully. No one knows except you and me. Something must have shown in my expression, because Julia leaned forward. Marion, whatever you're thinking, remember that legally, this money is entirely yours. Your father left everything directly to you, not to Beverly. I know. I set the certificate down carefully. And for the first time in my life, I'm going to make a decision based solely on what I want. The next morning found me seated across from Mr. Phillips at First National Bank, opening new accounts and arranging for the transfer of my newly discovered assets. Julia accompanied me, expertly guiding the process to ensure everything was properly documented and secured. Mrs. Cooper, this is quite a substantial sum, Mr. Phillips remarked, clearly upgrading his treatment of me with each zero added to my net worth. We'd be happy to arrange a meeting with our wealth management team at your convenience. That would be fine, but not immediately, I replied. I have other plans for the next few weeks. Those plans crystallized as soon as I returned home. I booked a one-way ticket to Barcelona, departing in 3 days. I contacted a realtor to list my house, the home where I'd raised Beverly, the address she'd been embarrassed to give to friends. I spent the next 2 days sorting through 36 years of life. Most of it would go into storage, some would be donated. Very little seemed worth keeping, which was an enlightening realization in itself. The severance package from my job, where I'd worked for 17 years with only a single promotion, was processed with startling efficiency once I explained I was leaving effective immediately. On the third morning, as the taxi waited outside to take me to the airport, I composed a brief email to Beverly, scheduled to deliver 1 week after she returned from her honeymoon. Beverly, by the time you read this, I will be in Barcelona, beginning a journey I've postponed for far too long. The house has been sold. My phone number has changed. If you need to reach me, Julia has my contact information. At your wedding, you made your feelings about being a Cooper quite clear. What you didn't know was that the same week you rejected your heritage, I discovered your grandfather left me a substantial inheritance. The name you're so ashamed of comes with a legacy you never imagined. I've supported your choices for 36 years. Now I'm making my own. Mom, I didn't mention the exact amount. I didn't need to. Beverly had always been excellent at mathematical calculations, especially when money was involved. As the plane lifted off American soil, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the weightlessness of possibility, unmarred by obligation. For the first time since I'd seen those 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test at 17, my future belonged entirely to me. Barcelona in June was everything I had imagined, and more. The Mediterranean sun bathed Antoni Gaudi's masterpieces in a golden light that made the undulating stone facades seem almost alive. Standing before La Sagrada Familia on my 3rd day in the city, I felt tears well up, not just for the breathtaking beauty of the basilica, but for the simple fact that I was actually here, seeing it with my own eyes. Magnificent, isn't it? A woman about my age with silver-streaked dark hair smiled at me. Her accent was British. No matter how many photographs you've seen, nothing prepares you for the real thing. It's like he built a dream, I replied, wiping my eyes unapologetically. First time in Barcelona? First time anywhere, really, I admitted. I've waited my whole life for this. She introduced herself as Diana, a retired art professor from London who spent 3 months in Barcelona every summer. When she learned I was staying indefinitely with no fixed plans, She insisted on showing me her Barcelona, the small cafes where locals gathered, the hidden courtyards tourists often missed, the best times to visit popular sites to avoid crowds. After a week of Diana's expert guidance, I found myself sitting on the terrace of a small apartment I'd impulsively rented for 3 months, sipping local wine and watching the sunset paint the city in shades of amber. My phone, a new number, a fresh start, chimed with a message from Julia. Beverly got your email yesterday. She's called my office 4 times. Craig called once, separately. What do you want me to tell them? I considered the question carefully. In my old life, I would have immediately called Beverly, apologized for upsetting her, and provided detailed explanations to ease her concerns. That instinct, to soothe, to accommodate, to put her feelings first, was still there, a muscle memory developed over decades of maternal sacrifice. But something had shifted in me. The woman who had sat silently through public humiliation at her daughter's wedding was changing, not hardening exactly, but finding her own center of gravity. Tell Beverly I'm well, and will contact her when I'm ready. Tell Craig thank you for his concern. Julia's response came quickly. Will do. How's Barcelona? I sent her a photo of my view, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled, like waking up from a very long nap. The next morning, I enrolled in a 6-week architectural history course focused on Catalonian modernisme. My classmates were mostly college students on study abroad programs and retirees pursuing long-held interests. At 53, I fell somewhere in the middle, not pursuing a career, but not merely passing time either. I was discovering a hunger for knowledge that had lain dormant for years, buried beneath the daily pressures of earning a living and meeting Beverly's needs. Now, with financial security and no obligations to anyone but myself, my mind seemed to expand daily, absorbing information with an almost desperate eagerness. You have an excellent eye for structural detail, my professor commented after I presented an analysis of Casa Batlló. Have you studied architecture before? One community college course, 35 years ago, I replied. Then life happened. He nodded thoughtfully. Well, perhaps life is unhappening now, yes? Creating space for what was meant to be. His words stayed with me as I expanded my explorations beyond Barcelona. On weekends, I took train trips to nearby coastal towns, eating seafood at small restaurants where no one spoke English, and I communicated through gestures and my steadily improving Spanish. I visited museums at my own pace, lingering for hours before paintings that moved me, skipping entire galleries that didn't. After one such day at the Picasso Museum, I returned to find 3 missed calls from an international number I didn't recognize. A voicemail notification appeared moments later. Mom, it's me. Beverly's voice sounded strained, carefully controlled. Julia refused to give me your number, which is fine, but we need to talk. About this inheritance, about what you're doing, about everything. Call me back. She hadn't said, please, hadn't asked how I was doing or expressed any interest in my new life. Her concern was clearly the money, the sudden wealth she'd learned about only after publicly denouncing her connection to it. I didn't call back. Instead, I booked a 2-week painting workshop in the coastal town of Cadaqués, where Salvador Dalí had lived and worked. I'd never considered myself artistic, had never had the time or resources to explore that side of myself, but found unexpected joy in mixing colors and learning to capture light on canvas. You're a natural, the instructor told me, examining my seascape. The way you've caught the movement of the water, many technical skills can be taught, but that intuitive understanding is rare. I blushed at the praise. I'm just enjoying the process. The best artists always do. By August, Barcelona had become swelteringly hot and crowded with tourists. Following Diana's advice, I decided to explore northern Spain, renting a car and driving through the lush green landscapes of Asturias and Cantabria. In small villages nestled between mountains and sea, I hiked along ancient pilgrimage routes, sampled local cheeses and ciders, and practiced my increasingly confident Spanish with farmers and fishermen who seemed delighted by my interest in their way of life. In a seaside pension in Santander, I checked my email for the first time in 2 weeks and found a message from Craig, not Beverly. Marion, I hope this finds you well. I apologize for reaching out directly, but I wanted you to know that Beverly is struggling with your absence. While I cannot and will not excuse her behavior at our wedding, I believe she sincerely regrets her words, though pride makes that difficult for her to admit. On a personal note, I want to thank you for the grace you showed that evening. You raised a daughter with many wonderful qualities, and I see your influence in the best parts of her. No response necessary. Just know that when you're ready to reconnect, there are open hearts waiting. Respectfully, Craig. His message touched me more deeply than I expected. There was no mention of money, no subtle probing about the inheritance, just human connection, acknowledgement of hurt, and respect for my boundaries. Perhaps I had misjudged him, assuming his wealth made him as status-conscious as Beverly. That night, sitting on a small balcony overlooking the Bay of Biscay, I found myself reflecting on the woman I was becoming. 3 months away from my old life had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I was more confident, more curious, more willing to take up space in the world without constant apology. Yet Craig's email had stirred something else, a reminder that healing wasn't just about geographical distance or newfound freedom. At some point, I would need to face the relationship with my daughter directly, to decide what place she would have in my new life. But not yet, not until I knew, with absolute clarity, who Marion Cooper was, when she wasn't defined by being Beverly's mother. That woman was still emerging, still finding her voice after decades of silence, and I owed her the time and space to fully arrive. Autumn arrived, painting the Spanish countryside in russet and gold. My 3-month apartment rental in Barcelona had stretched to 6 months, then transformed into a more permanent arrangement when I found a sun-drenched 2-bedroom flat in the Gracia neighborhood. I'd furnished it slowly, selecting each piece with deliberate care: the antique writing desk positioned near the window, the locally crafted bookshelves already filling with architecture volumes and art books, the comfortable sofa where I now spent evenings sketching or reading instead of watching television. On a crisp November morning, as I sipped coffee on my small terrace, my phone rang with Julia's familiar number. "You've been gone for 5 months," she said without preamble. "Beverly's called me 17 times. "Good morning to you too," I replied, watching an old woman hang laundry on the balcony across the street. "How are things in the real world? That's what I'm calling about. Your real world needs some attention, Marion. There are decisions that require your input." I sighed, knowing she was right. While I'd been rediscovering myself in Spain, life had continued back home. The money from selling my house sat in an account, untouched. The bulk of my inheritance remained in the investments my father had so wisely chosen, managed now by financial advisors Julia had helped me select. I'd been living comfortably but modestly on a small portion of the dividends, reluctant to make any major decisions about the principal. What specifically needs my attention? The Valence Tech board is voting on a significant acquisition next month. As a major shareholder, you should have input. The property developers want final approval on plans for your father's land. And, she hesitated briefly, Beverly is pregnant. The last piece of news hit me with unexpected force. I would be a grandmother. The continuation of a lineage Beverly had publicly rejected. How far along is she? About 4 months, according to Craig. He's the one who told me, actually. Thought you should know. So Beverly hadn't wanted to tell me herself, or perhaps didn't know how to reach me, since I'd maintained my distance despite knowing Julia could connect us if I wished. Either way, the news created a complicated tangle of emotions: joy, sadness, wistfulness, and a strange sense of time's relentless forward motion. Thank you for letting me know. I watched a pair of birds land on my terrace railing, fearless in their proximity to humans after generations of urban living. I'll book a flight home next week, just for a short visit, to handle the business matters. And Beverly? I hesitated. I'll see her if she wants to see me. But Julia, I'm not moving back permanently. My life is here now. After ending the call, I sat for a long time, contemplating the change that had occurred within me. 6 months ago, news of Beverly's pregnancy would have sent me rushing home immediately, eager to support her, to slip back into the familiar role of self-sacrificing mother. Now, while I felt genuine happiness about the baby, I also recognized that Beverly was an adult with a husband and resources of her own. My presence wasn't essential to her well-being, and maintaining my own well-being had finally become a priority. The flight back to the United States felt like traveling backward in time. As the plane descended toward familiar territory, I studied my reflection in the small window, the same face, but somehow different. My hair, once carefully colored to hide the gray, now showed distinguished silver streaks. My clothing, once selected for practicality and modesty, now reflected a developing personal style. Elegant scarves, bold colors, comfortable but well-cut pieces that suited my still slender frame. Julia met me at the airport, embracing me warmly before stepping back to examine me with a critical eye. "Europe agrees with you," she declared. "You look 10 years younger." "I feel it," I admitted as we walked to her car. "Being invisible was aging me." She nodded, understanding. "I've booked you into the Westfield Hotel downtown. Your meetings with the financial team and developers are scheduled for tomorrow and Thursday, and—" she glanced at me sidelong. "Craig called when I told him you were coming. He and Beverly would like to see you." I took a deep breath. "Did he say why?" "Just that it's important to Beverly. She's been having a difficult pregnancy. Nothing dangerous," she added quickly, seeing my alarm. "Just uncomfortable. Morning sickness, fatigue." I remembered those days all too well. 17, terrified, violently ill every morning before school. My father had held my hair back, brought me dry toast and ginger ale, driven me to classes when I was too dizzy to walk the 6 blocks. No one had done those things for me because Beverly's father was supposed to, and he'd disappeared the moment the pregnancy test showed positive. "I'll see them tomorrow evening," I decided, after the business meetings. The hotel was luxurious in a way I would have found intimidating before. Now, I simply appreciated the crisp sheets, efficient service, and excellent room service coffee I enjoyed the next morning while preparing for my meetings. The financial advisors treated me with a deference that still felt strange, listening attentively to my questions, presenting options without pushing for immediate decisions, addressing me as Ms. Cooper, with a respect my former colleagues had never shown the administrative assistant who kept their office running. The property developers were similarly solicitous, outlining various possibilities for the land my father had purchased 5 decades earlier. A mixed-use development was their recommendation. Retail spaces, offices, and residential units with significant green areas incorporated throughout the design. "We could name the central plaza after your father," the lead architect suggested. "Cooper Plaza has a nice ring to it." The idea brought unexpected tears to my eyes. My quiet, unassuming father, memorialized in the city where he'd spent his life fixing other people's vehicles, never hinting at the legacy he was quietly building. "He would have liked that," I said softly. "But with one condition, I want 30% of the residential units designated as affordable housing for working families, with controlled rent increases." The developers exchanged glances, clearly calculating the impact on their profit margins. "That's an unusual request for this type of development," one began carefully. "Those are my terms," I replied, a newfound steel in my voice. "My father worked his entire life to provide stability for his family. I want his legacy to offer that same stability to others." After some negotiation, they agreed to 25% affordable units, with my foundation, yet to be established, but suddenly clear in my mind, subsidizing the difference to reach my 30% goal. I left the meeting feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with financial gain and everything to do with honoring values that had shaped me. The meeting with Beverly and Craig, scheduled for 7 o'clock at their home, loomed ahead. As my taxi approached their address in an exclusive neighborhood, I felt my shoulders tensing, old patterns of anxiety resurfacing. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was no longer the person who had sat silently through public humiliation at her daughter's wedding. I was Marion Cooper, a woman who had crossed oceans and found herself on distant shores. Whatever happened next, I would face it standing firmly on my own ground. The house was exactly what I would have expected, a stately colonial with perfect landscaping and a 3-car garage situated on a street where every property exuded quiet wealth. As I paid the taxi driver, I noticed Beverly watching from the window, her silhouette disappearing as I approached the front door. Craig answered my knock, his expression a careful blend of warmth and uncertainty. "Marion, thank you for coming." He kissed my cheek, a new gesture between us, and stepped back to let me enter. "You look wonderful." "Thank you. Spain has been good for me." I handed him the bottle of Spanish wine I'd brought, a small olive branch. "Beverly's in the living room." He lowered his voice slightly. "She's nervous, more than she'll admit." The living room was a designer's showcase, cream-colored sofas, tasteful art, nothing out of place. Beverly stood as I entered, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. The gesture seemed unconscious, protective. "Mom." Her voice wavered slightly. She looked thinner than at the wedding, despite the pregnancy. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally perfect hair appeared hastily arranged. I approached her carefully, uncertain of the protocol for this moment. Did we embrace? Shake hands? Pretend the wedding toast never happened? Beverly solved the dilemma by suddenly bursting into tears, not the pretty, controlled crying she had perfected as a teenager, but ragged, messy sobs that bent her forward. "I'm sorry," she gasped, covering her face. "Stupid hormones." Craig moved immediately to her side, guiding her back to the sofa. I sat across from them, maintaining a small but deliberate distance. "You've been well?" I asked when her crying subsided, keeping my tone gentle but neutral. Beverly nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue Craig produced. "The morning sickness is better now. Doctor says everything's on track for April." She glanced at my face, then away. "You look different." "I am different." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Craig finally broke it, offering drinks and disappearing to the kitchen to give us a moment alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" Beverly asked as soon as he was gone. "About Grandpa's money, about being—" She struggled with the word, "rich." "I didn't know myself until after your wedding. But you knew before you left the country. You could have called me, explained everything." I studied my daughter's face, beautiful even in distress, with features that had always resembled my father's more than mine. Would it have mattered? Would knowing about the money have changed how you feel about being a Cooper? She flinched slightly. "That toast was— I'd had champagne. I was nervous. It came out wrong." "Did it? Or did it come out exactly as you meant it, just not in a context you expected to be held accountable for?" Beverly looked down at her hands, perfectly manicured, adorned with her substantial engagement ring and wedding band. "I've always felt like we didn't belong," she said quietly. "Like we were always on the outside looking in at the life we should have had." "We had exactly the life we were meant to have," I replied. "One built on hard work, education, and the values your grandfather believed in. The grandfather I barely knew. The one who apparently was secretly a millionaire while we lived in a tiny house and I wore second-hand clothes to school." The bitterness in her voice surprised me. Even now, faced with the reality of her grandfather's legacy, she could only see what she perceived as deprivation. "Your grandfather made investments for the future, not for immediate gratification. He understood the difference between value and price, something I tried to teach you as well." Craig returned with a tray of drinks, sparkling water for Beverly, wine for us. He'd clearly been giving us space to navigate the initial awkwardness. "Marion was just explaining her father's investment philosophy," Beverly said, a slight edge in her voice. Craig sat beside her, his steady presence seeming to calm her. "I've been reading about Thomas Cooper," he said, surprising me. "Fascinating man. Self-educated, forward-thinking. He bought that Valence Tech stock when everyone thought personal computers were just a fad." I smiled, oddly touched that he had taken the time to learn about my father. Dad read constantly. Science journals, business magazines, anything he could get from the library. He always said knowledge was the best investment. "Is that why you went to Spain?" Beverly asked. "For knowledge? Partly. And partly to discover who I am when I'm not defined by other people's expectations." Beverly's eyes filled with tears again. "You left because of what I said at the wedding. I left because it was time for me to prioritize my own dreams for once. Your toast was a catalyst, yes, but this journey was long overdue." Craig leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We both want you to know that we respect the distance you've created, and that we're genuinely happy you're finding fulfillment. But with the baby coming," he glanced at Beverly, who nodded encouragement, "we hope there might be room in your new life for a relationship with your grandchild." The directness of his approach was refreshing. No manipulation, no guilt, just a straightforward acknowledgement of the situation. "I would like that," I said honestly, "but on new terms. I won't be the grandmother who exists solely to provide free childcare or financial support. I have my own life now, one I'm not willing to abandon." "Of course," Craig agreed quickly. Beverly looked less certain, studying me with newfound wariness, perhaps recognizing that the mother who had always accommodated her wishes had been replaced by someone with firm boundaries. "So you're really staying in Spain?" she asked. "Permanently?" "For now. It feels like home in a way this city doesn't anymore." I took a sip of wine, appreciating its complex notes. "I'm considering buying a small property in the countryside as well, somewhere to paint and garden." "Paint?" Beverly looked genuinely confused. "Since when do you paint?" "Since August. I'm not particularly good yet, but I enjoy it." I smiled, remembering my small victories with watercolors. I'm learning to do things for the joy of the process, not just the outcome. A flash of something. Envy? Regret? Crossed Beverly's face. That sounds nice. The conversation shifted to her pregnancy, the nursery they were planning, Craig's work. Normal family topics, discussed with a politeness that felt both artificial and necessary. We were rebuilding from scratch, feeling our way toward something that might eventually become authentic. As the evening drew to a close, Beverly walked me to the door while Craig called for my taxi. "Will you at least be here when the baby comes?" she asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. I touched her cheek gently, the first physical contact between us all evening. "Yes, I'll come for the birth. And visit regularly. But my home is in Barcelona now." "And the money?" she asked, the question she'd clearly been holding back all evening. "What are you doing with Grandpa's inheritance?" "Living modestly on a small portion," I replied truthfully. "The rest is being thoughtfully invested and allocated. I'm establishing a foundation in your grandfather's name to provide educational opportunities for working-class students." "Nothing for your grandchild?" The old Beverly surfaced briefly, calculating, focused on material advantage. "My grandchild will have tremendous privilege already with 2 wealthy parents. What I hope to give him or her is something more valuable, an understanding of where they come from. The Cooper legacy of education, hard work, and forward thinking." The taxi arrived, saving us from further awkwardness. As I slid into the back seat, Beverly called after me. "Mom? What was he like? Grandpa? Really like, I mean." I smiled, heart-warming at her first genuine question of the evening. He was the quietest, kindest man I've ever known. With the sharpest mind and the steadiest hands, he would have been so proud of the baby. For the first time that evening, Beverly's smile reached her eyes. "I'd like to hear more, sometime." "I'd like that too," I replied, meaning it. January brought cold rain to Barcelona, turning the city streets slick and reflective. I didn't mind. After decades of Midwestern American winters, the mild Mediterranean climate felt like a perpetual gift. I'd developed a routine of morning coffee at a small cafe near my apartment, where the owner now greeted me by name and remembered my preference for pan con tomate alongside my cortado. On this particular morning, my peaceful ritual was interrupted by an email from Julia, marked urgent. The City Planning Commission had approved our mixed-use development for my father's land, with the affordable housing component intact. Construction would begin in March, with Cooper Plaza as its centerpiece. Attached were architectural renderings showing a thoughtfully designed public square with green spaces, benches, and at its center, a modest bronze sculpture of a man reading to a child on his lap. The artist had captured my father's essence from photographs, his gentle eyes, the slight tilt of his head when he was listening intently, the large, capable hands that could both fix complicated engines and turn the delicate pages of my childhood storybooks. Tears blurred my vision as I studied the images. Dad would have been embarrassed by this recognition, yet proud of its purpose. Cooper Plaza would become a gathering place for families, surrounded by homes they could actually afford in an increasingly expensive city. The second part of Julia's email contained the finalized structure for the Thomas Cooper Foundation. After months of planning with legal and financial advisors, we had created an organization that would provide educational grants to working-class students pursuing trades, technical training, or traditional college degrees. Special emphasis would be placed on single parents seeking education while raising children, an acknowledgement of my own journey and the support my father had provided. "The foundation needs a director," Julia had written, "someone with personal understanding of its mission and the financial acumen to steward resources responsibly. Consider it, Marion." I walked home through light rain, contemplating this unexpected fork in my path. For months, I'd focused on personal rediscovery, learning Spanish, studying architecture, developing my painting skills. The foundation would require returning to the States regularly, engaging with institutional partners, making decisions that would impact many lives. It would mean stepping back into the world I'd left behind, albeit in a very different role. At home, I found a package from Craig, a beautiful leather-bound journal with a note explaining that Beverly had entered her 3rd trimester and they were beginning childbirth classes. The journal, he suggested, might be a place for me to record memories or wisdom I wanted to share with my grandchild. His thoughtfulness touched me. Since my visit in November, Craig had maintained regular contact through brief, respectful emails, updates about the pregnancy, questions about my life in Barcelona, never pushing for more connection than I was ready to give. Beverly, by contrast, had been sporadically in touch with short texts that ranged from perfunctory updates to midnight emotional outpourings, depending on her mood and hormonal state. I ran my fingers over the journal's soft leather, considering what I might want my grandchild to know. About their great-grandfather, certainly. About the value of patience and long-term thinking. About finding one's own path, even if it comes later in life. Perhaps directing the foundation would be part of the legacy I could describe in these pages. Not just the inheritance of wealth, but the inheritance of purpose. I called Julia that evening to discuss the directorship. I'd need to structure it differently than a traditional role, I explained. Barcelona remains my home base. I could spend 1 week each month in the States, with additional virtual involvement. That could work, Julia agreed. We'd need a strong day-to-day manager on the ground, but you could provide strategic direction and be the foundation's public face when needed. Public face? You know I've never been comfortable with attention. She laughed softly. The Marion Cooper who disappeared to Spain without warning and is now dictating terms for running a multi-million-dollar foundation seems quite comfortable making bold moves. Fair point, I conceded, smiling despite myself. After our call, I opened my laptop to research similar foundations, wanting to understand best practices before committing. An email notification appeared from Beverly with the subject line, Name Ideas. Mom, we had our 30-week appointment today. Everything looks perfect. We're finalizing name choices, and I wanted your input, since this will be your only grandchild. For a boy, James Craig Hamilton, after Craig's father. For a girl, Elizabeth Victoria Hamilton, after Craig's mother and my middle name. Let me know your thoughts, Beverly. I stared at the screen, absorbing the implications. No Cooper anywhere in either name option. Your only grandchild, stated as a fact, when Beverly was only 36 and could certainly have more children in the future. The message felt simultaneously like an olive branch, asking my opinion, and a reminder of my peripheral status in her new life. I considered various responses, from pointing out the Cooper omission to simply approving her choices. Neither felt right. After careful thought, I wrote, Beverly, thank you for including me in this decision. Both options are lovely, honoring Craig's family tradition. I'm curious, did your father-in-law or mother-in-law have middle names that might allow room for a Cooper connection as well? Your grandfather would be so proud to have his legacy continue in this new generation. Either way, I look forward to meeting this perfectly healthy little one in April. Love, Mom. I closed my laptop, not waiting for a response. The boundaries I'd established since leaving were still necessary, I realized. While our relationship was gradually healing, old patterns remained. Beverly's dismissal of her Cooper heritage, my instinct to accommodate rather than advocate for myself. The following morning brought another email from Julia. The Planning Commission had requested my presence at the groundbreaking ceremony for Cooper Plaza in March. The timing aligned perfectly with Beverly's due date in early April. I could attend the ceremony, meet with potential foundation staff, and be present for the birth of my grandchild. As I prepared to respond, a text from Beverly arrived. Thomas James Hamilton for a boy. Elizabeth Cooper Hamilton for a girl. Craig suggested it. He says every legacy deserves respect. I smiled, feeling a surge of appreciation for my son-in-law's emotional intelligence. Perhaps Craig understood better than Beverly the importance of honoring where we come from, even as we forge our own paths forward. Beautiful choices, I texted back. Thank you. That evening, I began writing in the leather journal Craig had sent. To my grandchild, you come from a long line of quiet strength. Your great-grandfather Thomas Cooper was a man who understood that true wealth lies not in bank accounts, but in the seeds we plant for future harvests we may never see ourselves. The words flowed easily, stories and wisdom I wanted to preserve. When I finished the first entry, I felt a sense of continuity, that regardless of Beverly's complicated feelings about her heritage, something essential of the Cooper legacy would continue. I emailed Julia my acceptance of the foundation directorship with the conditions I'd outlined. Then I booked my flight back to the States for March, giving myself time to prepare Cooper Plaza's groundbreaking ceremony before Beverly's April due date. The path ahead would require balancing my newfound independence with reconnection to the world I'd left behind. But for the first time in my life, I felt confident in my ability to maintain boundaries while building bridges, to honor my father's legacy while continuing to create my own. March in my hometown felt colder than Barcelona, the lingering winter reluctant to release its grip. I arrived 10 days before the Cooper Plaza groundbreaking, settling into a suite at the Westfield Hotel that Julia had arranged as my temporary residence. The contrast between this luxurious accommodation and the modest home I'd occupied for decades struck me anew, not with bitterness, but with a profound appreciation for life's unexpected turns. My first meeting was with the architectural team finalizing details for Cooper Plaza. The lead architect, a thoughtful woman named Cassandra Lynn, walked me through material selections and landscaping plans with genuine enthusiasm. "We've incorporated elements that reflect your father's practical nature," she explained, showing me how the plaza's main pathways created an open book pattern when viewed from above. Durable materials, low-maintenance plantings, but with an elegance that elevates the everyday, much like his investment approach. "He would have appreciated that," I said, touched by how thoroughly they'd embraced the spirit of my father's legacy. "Though he'd have questioned the cost of those benches," she laughed. "Even high-quality investments require some initial capital." Later that afternoon, I met with Hannah Reed, the woman Julia had recommended as the foundation's day-to-day manager. Young but impressively credentialed, with experience in both education and nonprofit management, Hannah had the perfect background for translating my vision into actionable programs. "I grew up in a working-class family," she told me over coffee. "First in my family to attend college, working multiple jobs to make it happen. The mission of this foundation resonates deeply with me." "What would you do differently from other educational foundations?" I asked, watching her reaction carefully. She considered the question thoughtfully. "Most foundations focus on traditional 4-year college paths. I'd want to ensure we're equally supportive of trade certifications, associate degrees, and alternative education models. College isn't the only path to financial stability and fulfillment." By the end of our conversation, I was confident Hannah was the right person to implement the foundation's daily operations. With her local presence and my strategic oversight from Barcelona, we could create something meaningful together. That evening, I called Beverly to let her know I'd arrived in town. At 36 weeks pregnant, she sounded exhausted, but determined to maintain her usual control. "We finished the nursery," she informed me. "Designer did a woodland theme in gender-neutral colors. Craig's mother thinks it's too modern, but it's my decision." "I'm sure it's lovely," I replied, choosing not to engage with the implied mother-in-law drama. "How are you feeling physically?" "Huge, uncomfortable, ready for this to be over." Her voice softened slightly. Would you want to see the nursery before the baby comes?" The invitation surprised me. Since my November visit, Beverly had maintained careful boundaries around her home and personal space. This small opening felt significant. "I'd like that very much. Dinner tomorrow?" "Nothing fancy. Craig's grilling." "Perfect." The next evening, Craig welcomed me warmly to their home, his genuine pleasure at seeing me again evident in his broad smile and the way he guided me to the most comfortable chair with a solicitousness usually reserved for Beverly. "She's resting," he explained, handing me a glass of wine. "Doctor says her blood pressure's running a bit high. Nothing concerning yet, but they're monitoring it." I nodded, remembering my own pregnancy complications. "The last month is challenging, especially for someone used to controlling everything," Craig said with gentle affection. "Beverly's struggling with the physical limitations." Before I could respond, Beverly appeared in the doorway, one hand supporting her substantial belly. She wore leggings and an oversized sweater, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. Her face was slightly puffy, her ankles visibly swollen. "You look beautiful," I said truthfully, seeing in her the miracle of new life that transcended temporary discomfort. "I look like a whale," she countered, but with the ghost of a smile. "But thanks for the lie." Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Craig's excellent grilling, conversation that carefully avoided contentious topics, and Beverly more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. As we lingered over dessert, she mentioned the foundation. "Craig's colleague is on the board of a similar organization," she said, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "He says it's impressive what you're putting together." "Thank you. It's still developing, but we've made good progress." "You never mentioned wanting to run a foundation before," she observed. "In fact, you always said you hated managing people at your admin job." "I hated managing people who undervalued my contributions." I corrected gently. This is different. It's creating something meaningful from scratch, with a team that shares the vision. Beverly absorbed this, then asked the question that perhaps had been on her mind for months. Why didn't Grandpa use any of that money while he was alive? We could have had a better house, better schools. You could have had help raising me instead of working all those extra hours. Craig tensed slightly, perhaps concerned this line of questioning would lead to conflict, but I welcomed Beverly's directness. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Your grandfather believed in security over luxury, I explained. Those investments were his safety net for our family's future, a future he wasn't certain he'd live to see. I met Beverly's eyes directly. And I don't regret the life we had. Working hard gave me satisfaction. Our home was filled with love, if not expensive things. But didn't you want more? She pressed. Nicer clothes, vacations, the things my friends had? Sometimes, I admitted, but I valued independence more, the ability to support us on my own terms, without depending on anyone else's approval or assistance. Beverly fell silent, perhaps recognizing the implicit contrast with her own choices. Her careful cultivation of relationships with wealthy classmates, her strategic dating choices culminating in marriage to Craig, her persistent pursuit of external validation through status symbols. I'd like to show you the nursery, she said finally, changing the subject. Craig helped her up, and I followed them upstairs to a beautifully appointed room painted in soft greens and creams, with a mural of stylized trees covering one wall. It's perfect, I said, running my hand over the handcrafted wooden crib. So peaceful. Beverly opened a dresser drawer, removing something carefully folded in tissue paper. I wanted to show you this. She unwrapped a small, well-worn quilt with faded animal patterns. My breath caught in recognition. Beverly's own baby blanket, the one my mother had made during my pregnancy. You kept it, I whispered, unexpectedly moved. It's the only thing I have from Grandma. Beverly smoothed the fabric with surprising tenderness. I thought the baby should have it, whether it's a boy or girl, to know where they come from. The simple gesture, Beverly preserving this connection to her roots despite her complex feelings about her heritage, touched me deeply. Perhaps motherhood was already softening some of her harder edges, creating space for values beyond status and appearance. Your mother would be honored, I said, careful not to overstate the moment's significance. As Craig walked me out later that evening, he hesitated at the door. She's trying, Marion. In her own way. This pregnancy has made her think about what really matters. I know, I assured him. Small steps are still steps forward. I returned to my hotel with cautious optimism. The groundbreaking ceremony was 3 days away, Beverly's due date just 2 weeks after that. Something was shifting between us, not a complete reconciliation, but the beginning of a more authentic relationship built on who we were now, not just our complicated history. That night, I added another entry to the journal for my grandchild. Family legacies are complex treasures, not just the material inheritances that pass from one generation to the next, but the values, the stories, the quiet examples that shape us in ways we often don't recognize until we become parents ourselves. Your mother is discovering this now, as she prepares to meet you, and I am rediscovering it through new eyes, as I prepare to become your grandmother. The morning of the Cooper Plaza groundbreaking dawned clear and cold. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit, professional but not ostentatious, with a single piece of jewelry, my father's watch, which I'd had restored and sized to fit my smaller wrist. Its steady ticking against my skin felt like his presence accompanying me to this moment he'd made possible without ever knowing it. Julia met me in the hotel lobby, her expression both proud and protective. Ready for your public debut as a philanthropist? That sounds far grander than I feel, I admitted as we walked to her car. I'm just Dad's daughter, trying to honor his foresight. Sometimes the most meaningful philanthropy comes from exactly that place, honoring where we came from while creating something new. The construction site had been transformed for the ceremony. A small stage stood where the central plaza would eventually be built, facing rows of chairs occupied by city officials, business leaders, and media representatives. Large renderings displayed the completed project, with Cooper Plaza prominently featured at its heart. As Julia and I approached, I was surprised to see Craig in the front row, looking professional in a well-cut suit. When he caught sight of me, he stood and waved. Beverly wanted to come, he explained as I reached him, but she had a doctor's appointment, Blood pressure's still running high. She should definitely prioritize that, I assured him, touched that they'd planned to attend. Please tell her I appreciate the thought. Actually, she asked me to record parts of the ceremony, said she wanted to see you in action. The idea of Beverly showing interest in this aspect of my life, so removed from the materialistic values she'd always prioritized, was unexpectedly moving. Before I could respond, the city's mayor approached, hand extended. Mrs. Cooper, it's an honor to meet you. Your vision for this development, especially the affordable housing component, is exactly what our city needs. My father's vision, I corrected gently. I'm just the steward. The ceremony began with various officials making predictably lengthy speeches about urban renewal and community investment. I listened attentively, watching Craig discreetly record key moments on his phone, presumably for Beverly. Finally, the mayor introduced me. And now, the woman whose generosity and vision have made this project possible, Mrs. Marion Cooper. As I walked to the podium, a strange calm settled over me. Public speaking had never been my strength. I'd always been the person organizing from behind the scenes, supporting others' moments in the spotlight. But today, representing my father's legacy, words came easily. Thank you, Mayor Williams. Distinguished guests, members of the community, I'm honored to be here, though the true honor belongs to my father, Thomas Cooper. The man for whom this plaza will be named never sought recognition. He fixed cars, read voraciously, and quietly planted seeds for a future he wouldn't live to see. I paused, looking out at the attentive faces. Craig was smiling encouragement, his phone still recording. My father believed that education, hard work, and forward thinking were the true foundations of wealth, not just financial wealth, but the richness of a life well lived. Cooper Plaza and the surrounding development will embody those values, creating spaces where families can live affordably, where children can play safely, where community can flourish. I continued, describing the Thomas Cooper Foundation's mission to support educational opportunities for working-class students, particularly single parents seeking to improve their families' futures through education and training. As I spoke, I noticed several reporters taking particular note, their pens moving rapidly across notepads. In closing, I'd like to share something my father often told me. Value isn't always visible at first glance. The most precious things often require patience to reveal their worth. Thank you for being part of revealing the value of his long-ago investment in this community. The applause was warm and genuine. After the ceremonial turning of dirt with gold-painted shovels, which would have made my practical father laugh, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers and reporters asking for interviews. Julia fielded most requests, scheduling a few for later in the week while protecting me from becoming overwhelmed. As the crowd began to disperse, Craig approached with his phone. Beverly's been watching the live stream I sent her. She's impressed. Is she? I couldn't help the note of surprise in my voice. Her exact words were, "Mom looks like she belongs up there, like she's been running foundations her whole life." Coming from Beverly, this was extraordinary praise. Thank you for sharing that. Craig hesitated, then said, "She's at the hospital. That doctor's appointment turned into an admission. Preeclampsia. They're monitoring her now, possibly inducing labor this evening if her numbers don't improve." "What? Why didn't you tell me immediately?" I asked, alarm replacing my earlier satisfaction. "Beverly made me promise not to tell you until after the ceremony. Said this was your moment, and she didn't want to ruin it." He smiled slightly. "That's progress, don't you think?" It was indeed a remarkable shift from the Beverly who had always demanded center stage. "Is she in danger? The baby?" "Doctor says they're being cautious, not panicked, but she'd like you to come, if you want to." "Of course I want to. Let me just tell Julia." 20 minutes later, we arrived at the hospital where 36 years earlier, I had given birth to Beverly myself, terrified, alone except for Julia holding my hand, uncertain about the future, but determined to give my child everything I could. Now Beverly occupied a private room in the maternity ward, monitoring equipment tracking her vital signs and the baby's steady heartbeat. Her face was puffy, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, but her expression when I entered held none of her customary defensiveness. "Mom," she said simply, "you came." "Of course I came." I moved to her bedside, taking her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," she admitted, a vulnerability I rarely saw in her. "They say preeclampsia can be dangerous, and the baby might come early." 36 weeks is nearly full term, I assured her. And medical care has advanced tremendously since I had you. She squeezed my hand surprisingly hard. I watched your speech on Craig's live stream. You were amazing. Thank you. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, a maternal gesture I hadn't used since she was a child. Your grandfather would have been proud of you too, you know, carrying his great-grandchild. A shadow of her old defensiveness crossed her face. Even after I rejected the Cooper name, said those awful things at the wedding? Even then, family is complicated, Beverly. We don't always understand the value of what we have until perspective shifts our vision. She was quiet for a moment, the only sounds the steady beeping of monitors and the muted hospital activities beyond her door. I think I get it now, she said finally. Why Grandpa invested that money instead of spending it. Why you worked so hard instead of looking for an easier path. Her free hand moved to her belly. It was never about the money itself. It was about creating security, building something lasting. Before I could respond, a doctor entered, a confident young woman who introduced herself as Dr. Patel. She reviewed Beverly's latest results with calm efficiency. Your blood pressure isn't stabilizing as we'd hoped. I recommend we move forward with inducing labor tonight. Beverly's hand tightened on mine. But it's 3 weeks early. Baby is developed enough that the risks of continuing the pregnancy now outweigh the benefits of waiting, Dr. Patel explained, especially with your blood pressure continuing to rise. After the doctor left to make preparations, Beverly looked at me with uncharacteristic vulnerability. Will you stay during the delivery? The request stunned me. Throughout her adult life, Beverly had maintained careful distance from needing me, from acknowledging any dependence on maternal support. If that's what you want, of course I'll stay. It is. She attempted a smile. Turns out becoming a mother makes you want your own mother nearby, even when you've been... She hesitated. Difficult. I'll be right here, I promised, settling into the chair beside her bed as nurses began preparing for the induction. For as long as you need me. Labor progressed slowly through the night. Beverly, who had always prided herself on controlling every aspect of her life, struggled visibly with surrendering to this fundamentally uncontrollable process. Each contraction seemed to challenge not just her physical endurance, but her entire worldview. I had a plan, she said between pains, frustration evident in her voice. Natural birth, but with an epidural at exactly the right moment, not 3 weeks early with medical intervention. I dampened a cloth and wiped her forehead gently. Babies rarely follow our carefully constructed plans. Did I follow yours? She asked, genuine curiosity momentarily overriding discomfort. Not remotely, I smiled. I was 17, Beverly. My plan had been college, then career, then maybe marriage and children much later. You arrived and rearranged everything. Do you regret it? How your life turned out? The question hung between us, honest in a way our conversations rarely were. Before I could answer, another contraction seized her, stronger than before. She gripped my hand with surprising strength, her carefully manicured nails digging into my palm. When the pain subsided, I answered thoughtfully, I regret some of my choices along the way. Moments when I prioritized your comfort over teaching you resilience. Times when I worked extra shifts for dance lessons instead of insisting you appreciate what we already had. I met her eyes directly. But regret you? Never. You are, the most magnificent thing that ever happened to me. Beverly's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Even after the wedding? After what I said about our name? Even then, I brushed away her tears. Love doesn't require perfect behavior, Beverly. It requires honesty, and you were honestly expressing feelings you'd harbored for years. Horrible feelings, she whispered. Complicated ones, I corrected. You associated our modest circumstances with rejection by your peers, with the absence of your father, with limitations you found frustrating. That's human, if somewhat short-sighted. Another contraction interrupted, more intense than before. Craig, who had been dozing in the corner chair, awoke and moved immediately to Beverly's other side, supporting her through the peak of pain with quiet encouragement. Throughout the night, this pattern continued. Moments of extraordinary connection and honesty between contractions, then complete focus on the physical process during them. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Patel returned to check Beverly's progress. You're fully dilated, she announced. Time to meet this baby. The delivery room transformed into a hive of focused activity. Nurses positioned Beverly. Equipment was readied. Lights brightened. Craig took his place at Beverly's side, while I prepared to step back, assuming my presence during the actual birth might be more than Beverly had intended when asking me to stay. "Mom?" Beverly called, her voice strained with effort and anxiety. "Don't go. I'm right here," I assured her, moving to her other side. What followed was both primal and transcendent. Beverly, working with a determination and strength I'd always known she possessed but had rarely seen, directed towards something beyond material acquisition or social climbing. Through each push, each moment of seeming impossibility, she found resources within herself I suspected she hadn't known existed. "I can see the head," Dr. Patel announced. "Lots of dark hair. One more big push, Beverly." With a guttural sound unlike anything I'd heard from my always composed daughter, Beverly gave a final, monumental effort. Seconds later, a newborn's indignant cry filled the room. Strong, vital, unmistakable. "It's a girl," Dr. Patel announced, placing the squirming, vernix-covered infant on Beverly's chest. "A beautiful girl." "Elizabeth Cooper Hamilton," Beverly whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "Hello, little one." I watched in wonder as my daughter, who had spent her adult life crafting a carefully polished exterior, dissolved into unguarded tears at the sight of her child. Craig leaned in, his own eyes wet, gently touching his daughter's dark hair with a reverence that made my heart ache. "She's perfect," he murmured. After a few precious moments of this first meeting, the nurses took Elizabeth for standard newborn procedures, weighing, measuring, assessing. Beverly turned to me, her face transformed by an emotion deeper than anything I'd seen in her before. "Thank you for staying," she said simply. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You absolutely could have," I corrected gently. "But I'm glad I was here to see it." Hours later, in the peaceful quiet of Beverly's private recovery room, I held my granddaughter for the first time. Elizabeth, Eliza, as Craig had already begun calling her, had indeed inherited the Cooper dark hair and, it seemed, the distinctive shape of my father's eyes. "She looks like Grandpa," I observed softly. "I thought so too," Beverly agreed from her bed, where she was resting comfortably. "I wish I'd known him better. You'll see him in her, I think, not just physically, but in the quiet determination I already see in this little face." Beverly watched us thoughtfully. "Will you tell her about him? When she's older? I don't have enough memories to share." "I'd be honored," I replied, deeply touched by the request. Craig entered with coffee for himself and herbal tea for Beverly. "The nurses say they've never seen a more alert newborn," he reported proudly. "Says she's tracking movement already like a much older baby." "Cooper genes," Beverly said, then looked at me with a small smile. Strong, smart, resilient. The simple acknowledgement of her heritage, stated with pride rather than disdain, felt like a bridge being rebuilt between us, stronger than before because it was now grounded in truth rather than obligation. As morning stretched toward afternoon, Beverly finally fell into an exhausted sleep. Craig took Eliza from my arms, cradling her with natural ease. "Marion," he said quietly, "Beverly and I have been talking. We'd like you to be a regular presence in Eliza's life, not just on holidays or special occasions. I know you've built a life in Barcelona, but perhaps more frequent visits? Maybe even a place here so you don't always have to stay in hotels?" The offer caught me by surprise, not just its generosity, but its implicit recognition that I had my own life now, one they wanted to accommodate rather than expecting me to abandon. "That's very thoughtful," I managed, genuinely moved. "I'd like that. Perhaps a small apartment near your home." "Or near Cooper Plaza," Craig suggested. "Once the development is complete, so Eliza can grow up understanding her great-grandfather's legacy." As I gazed at my sleeping daughter and the tiny granddaughter who bore our family name, I felt a circle completing. Not perfectly, not without its damaged segments still in need of repair, but stronger than I would have thought possible 6 months earlier. "I think," I said quietly, "that would be the perfect arrangement." Later, alone in my hotel room, I added a new entry to the journal for Eliza. "Today you arrived, Elizabeth Cooper Hamilton, bringing with you a bridge between worlds I thought might remain forever separate. Your very existence has created new possibilities for healing, for understanding, for continuity. You carry not just a name but a legacy of quiet strength, foresight, and resilience. Welcome to our imperfect, evolving, precious family." 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking Cooper Plaza. The development had been completed with remarkable efficiency. transforming what had once been neglected land into a vibrant community space. From my vantage point, I could see children playing around the central fountain, office workers enjoying lunch on benches beneath flowering trees, and residents of the affordable housing units coming and going with the comfortable familiarity of people who feel at home in their surroundings. The bronze sculpture of my father reading to a child had become a popular meeting spot, with people often saying, "I'll see you at the reader," without even knowing the significance of the figure they were referencing. Dad would have appreciated that quiet integration into daily life far more than any grandiose monument. My own life had found a similar balance, not grandiose, but purposeful and pleasantly divided between two worlds. 8 months of the year in Barcelona, where I continued my architecture studies and had begun showing my paintings in a small local gallery. 4 months in this apartment near Cooper Plaza, where I directed foundation activities and, more importantly, maintained a regular presence in my granddaughter's life. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. Through the peephole, I saw Beverly with Eliza in her arms, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a simple blouse. "We're early," she announced as I opened the door. "Craig got called in for an emergency client meeting, so it's just us for lunch." "Perfect," I replied, reaching for Eliza, who lunged toward me with a delighted squeal. At 14 months, she was a whirlwind of energy and determination, already walking confidently and attempting to communicate everything she observed in an elaborate combination of words and gestures. "Gamma," she proclaimed, patting my cheek with a slightly sticky hand. "She had a banana in the car," Beverly explained, setting the diaper bag down. "Fair warning, she's been asking for Paza all morning. I think she wants to see the fountain after lunch." "The plaza it is," I agreed, settling Eliza on my hip. "I made that pasta salad she liked last time." Beverly followed me to the kitchen, where she automatically began setting the table while I secured Eliza in her high chair. This easy domesticity between us was still new enough to feel remarkable, a rhythm we'd never established when she was growing up, when every interaction had been colored by her ambition to escape our modest circumstances and my determination to provide opportunities I'd never had. The foundation selected its first cohort of scholarship recipients, I mentioned, as we sat down to eat. 20 single parents pursuing everything from nursing degrees to electrician certifications. "That's wonderful," Beverly said, expertly cutting pasta into tiny pieces for Eliza. "Will there be some kind of ceremony?" "A small reception next week. Nothing elaborate. These are people with jobs and children and limited time. But we wanted to mark the occasion." Beverly nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to attend if that's okay. Maybe help with something?" The offer surprised me. While Beverly had shown increasing interest in the foundation over the past year, she'd maintained a respectful distance from active involvement, perhaps uncertain of her place in an organization celebrating the Cooper legacy she'd once publicly rejected. "We'd love to have you there," I said carefully. "Any particular reason for the interest?" She concentrated on helping Eliza capture a slippery piece of pasta before answering. "I've been thinking a lot about going back to work. Not to my old job in marketing. That feels empty now." She glanced at Eliza. "Being a mother changed my priorities, but I still want to do something meaningful." "And the foundation interests you?" "The educational aspect does." She met my eyes directly. "I was thinking about establishing a specific scholarship program within the foundation for young single mothers, like you were, with my own funds." I set down my fork, genuinely stunned by this proposal. "That would be remarkable, Beverly." "It's not entirely altruistic," she admitted with unexpected candor. "I've been thinking about redemption lately. How to make amends for the horrible things I said about our name, our heritage. This feels like a way to honor what you and Grandpa built, while contributing something of my own." The distance we'd traveled in 1 year felt suddenly immeasurable. From Beverly's wedding toast denouncing her Cooper heritage to this moment, her proposing to invest her own resources in perpetuating that same legacy, represented a transformation I wouldn't have dared hope for. "I think that's a perfect idea," I said finally. "Hannah, our director, can help structure it however you envision." After lunch, we walked to the plaza as promised, Eliza between us holding both our hands and occasionally demanding to be swung forward with delighted shrieks. The late April sunshine warmed the air, bringing people outdoors to enjoy the welcoming public space. As we approached the fountain, Eliza broke free, toddling toward the bronze sculpture with surprising speed for her short legs. Beverly and I followed, exchanging amused glances at her determination. "Gamma book," Eliza declared, pointing up at the bronze reader. "That's right, sweetie." "That's your great-grandfather reading a book," I explained, though she was far too young to understand the significance. Beverly studied the sculpture with new interest. "It really does capture him, from the photos I've seen. That gentle focus. The artist used pictures from when I was about 5, I explained. Dad would read to me every night, no matter how tired he was from working at the garage. We sat on a bench facing the fountain, Eliza happily occupied with watching the water patterns change. Beverly seemed unusually contemplative, observing the diverse mix of people enjoying the plaza, business professionals, young families from the affordable housing units, elderly residents who came daily to sit in the sunshine. "I've been thinking about what you said last year," she said finally. "During labor, when I asked if you regretted how your life turned out. I remember. You said you regretted prioritizing my comfort over teaching resilience, giving me things instead of perspective." She watched Eliza, who had found a small leaf to examine with intense concentration. "I don't want to make the same mistakes with her. I don't want her growing up thinking her value comes from what she owns or who she knows. The fact that you're aware of that danger puts you ahead already," I observed. "Parenting is largely trial and error, Beverly. We all make mistakes. The key is being willing to adjust course when we recognize them. Like you did when you moved to Barcelona?" She smiled slightly. "That was quite an adjustment. It was the adjustment I needed to make, to discover who Marion Cooper was, beyond being your mother or David's administrative assistant." "And who is she?" Beverly asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Who are you now, Mom?" I considered the question thoughtfully. "I'm a woman who loves architecture and painting, who speaks mediocre Spanish but tries anyway, who runs a foundation honoring her father's legacy while creating her own, who is rediscovering her relationship with her daughter while building one with her granddaughter." I smiled at Eliza, who had returned to show us her leaf discovery. "I'm still becoming, I think." "We all are." Beverly nodded, helping Eliza climb onto the bench between us. "I used to think growing up meant reaching some fixed destination, having the right job, house, husband, status, but watching Eliza change every day makes me realize we're all constantly evolving, or should be. That's wisdom many people never acquire," I said softly. As afternoon stretched toward evening, we walked back to my apartment, Eliza eventually tiring enough to request being carried. Beverly gathered her up without complaint, another change from the woman who had once worried about designer clothes being wrinkled. At my door, Beverly hesitated before leaving. "Craig and I have been talking about having another baby, maybe later this year." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "Eliza would be a wonderful big sister. If it's a boy," she added quietly, "we'd like to name him Thomas Cooper Hamilton, if that's okay with you." Tears sprung to my eyes unexpectedly. Dad would be so honored, as am I. After they left, I sat at my desk overlooking the plaza as twilight descended. The foundation offices on the building's lower floors were dark now, but tomorrow they would be busy with the work of creating opportunities for a new generation, work that Beverly now wanted to join. I opened the leather journal I'd been keeping for Eliza, which had grown considerably over the past year. On a fresh page, I wrote, "Today, your mother spoke of redemption and legacy, of learning from mistakes and evolving beyond them. This perhaps is the greatest wealth your great-grandfather left us, not the financial resources that created this plaza and our foundation, but the example of quiet growth, of planting seeds with patience, of valuing substance over appearance. You, sweet Eliza, will inherit not just the Cooper name, but this evolving legacy of thoughtfulness, resilience, and authenticity. And if the brother your parents are considering joins our family, he will carry your great-grandfather's name forward into yet another generation. What began with rejection, that painful wedding toast where your mother denounced her heritage, has transformed into something none of us could have imagined. A family reconnected not through obligation, but through genuine understanding and respect for the legacy we share. Some inheritances are measured in dollars. Others, far more valuable, are measured in wisdom, in perspective, in the courage to acknowledge mistakes and grow beyond them. You, Elizabeth Cooper Hamilton, are the living embodiment of that more precious inheritance, and watching you grow into it is the greatest joy of my unexpected second act.